It is indeed a great privilege and honor to be here today before the distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I am indeed grateful that you have taken out time to be present today to be a part of this program. I do apologize for the delay that we've experienced. It was due to technical issues. So I want to say a big thank you. And without much ado, I wish to formally welcome you all. The theme of the keynote address is State of Emergency, Creating the Future, because every child matters. So the Architect 2022 State of Emergency is a project of the Fundacion Exito that is focused on the development of primary and secondary school children. Fundacion Exito is a non-governmental social enterprise registered under the laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, with focus on nation building through social change and value reorientation. In order to engineer a healthy social structure, sustainable development, positively productive leadership, and transgenerational influence. So the Arctic 2022 webinar State of Emergency is focused on eradicating violence against children in Nigeria. So with the menace of violence going on against children, it is imperative that we have this conversation and go to the root of the problem and find the solution.
Good morning. And once again, we apologize for this massive delay. We're having massive technical issues, but we're trying to sort through those. And actually, we're just going to go ahead and proceed with this webinar. Would ask that please all panelists, please mute your microphones. We're getting some extensive feedback. My name is Ofi Ejembi, and I'll be the moderator for the panel. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for making up the time. And apologies can never be enough for this delay. And you've wondered what has been done. Don Davis, Beatrice Ijayi, Karen Hapok, Sylvester. These are some of the names that made it to the news. But for every single one that you heard about, there are hundreds, possibly even thousands more that we have never heard about. We've concerned ourselves with these particular cases, but maybe we need to take a step back to consider the legal, the social, the cultural, and even the governmental issues that make violence against children such a common feature of the Nigerian society, and the lack of sanctions for people who have been allegedly at the center of these crimes. This is what we hope to address today at the Architect 2022. Once again, welcome every single person to this discussion. And like I typically say, that even though we do have panelists, every thought is welcome. And if at some point you have a question or would want to participate in our online poll, please make sure that your voice is heard. We want to make sure that as much as possible, we can funnel all ideas, all responses, so that some form of policy direction can be collated to make sure that violence against children is a thing of the past, or at least is reduced to the barest minimum. Well, today we have an illustrious panel of speakers. Our keynote speaker today is Emily Ajisebutu, who is an educator of 33 years experience, spanning the early years education to secondary school level. She has a Bachelor in Arts with honors in English language, holds a diploma in early childhood education, and has had various local and international trainings in teaching and education, as well as handling academic managerial duties. She will be our first and keynote speaker as she addresses the issues of school ownership, the stakeholders' responsibility perspective on violence against children. She's a seasoned facilitator who consults on educational matters has taught at great schools such as the Grange School, and has been head of school in 3 schools, including the Corona School in Ikoyi, Lagos. She was until recently principal academics at the Caleb British International School and has at various times served as secretary to the Parents Teachers Associations in the schools she's worked in. She currently works as an educational consultant and has helped in setting up several private schools and upgrading the standards in academics. She's also a director in the Kira Autism Foundation. She's married with children and serves as a deaconess at the House on the Rock Church in Lagos. And just before she comes on to give us her keynote address, I would like to also introduce very briefly, we'll get to more details when they come up to speak, the rest of our panel. Funmi Ogbue will be our second speaker. She'll be addressing family, parenting, and the government responsibility. She is the gas procurement and consigliere of Jake Riley. It's focused on Zebra security, providing physical security services and defense procurement, and the founder, Support Our Troops Foundation, an NGO set up to promote citizen support for military troops and their families. We also have Sam Obafemi, who is the owner, Business Study Group, and president, Sam Obafemi Coaching Academy. He will be addressing mental health, trauma, and emotional intelligence perspective. He is popularly called Coach Sam. Sam Obafemi has carved a niche for himself in the neuroscience with niches in stress management, emotional intelligence, anger mastery, as well as strategy and operations industry, especially for MSMEs. He's a graduate from the prestigious Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University and holds a BTech with honors in computer science. He proceeded to acquire his professional qualifications in human systems and is the first Nigerian certified anger mastery coach and therapist from the Century Anger Management Institute in the United States. We'll also be listening to Toasty Martins, who is a rare musical talent with versatility and originality in style and expression, and remains unequaled in today's entertainment world. He will be speaking on media and entertainment and that influence on violence against children and the future of children. Called to the bar in 2003, he's a lawyer turned musical artist and has 4 albums to his credit. He also has 25 years professional experience in the music industry. He has won several awards and award nominations, including the Future Awards, Gospel Achievers Awards, the Nigeria Entertainment Awards USA, and a host of others. Ogechi Abu will also be speaking today. She is a consummate legal practitioner with years active legal practice and expertise in human rights, gender, and child's rights commercial disputes. She's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and a senior lawyer in the law firm of Bowell, first year and leading Nigerian law firm. She today will be speaking about the legal and regulatory / policy perspective, the past, present, and future of laws in respect of violence against children, and also the adequacy of the Child Rights Act of 2003. That is our panel. At this time, I'm going to hand over to our keynote speaker, Ms. Emily Ajisebutu. Ms. Emily.
Good afternoon or good morning. Okay, it's good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And once again, we do apologize for starting off so late. I would not waste time, so I'll go straight to the point. I want to thank the convergence of this meeting for thinking proactively. And I also want to say thank you to the other panelists for what they're going to bring on board. And a special thank you to you, our listeners, for being so kind and so nice to stay on, despite the time it's taken us to start. Our theme for today is State of Emergency, Violence Against Children, Creating the Future, Every Child Matters. Now, violence is not something we're all not used to, because I'm sure from the age of 2 to 17, every one of us has experienced one kind of violence. When I was writing my thoughts yesterday, I kind of thought, this violence, is it not becoming a part of us as Nigerians? I don't know about other climes so much, but I do know that in Nigeria, we particularly are a violent set of people. What is violence? The Oxford Dictionary defines violence as a behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. So I can safely say that violence against children is a behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill the child. Violence occurs everywhere we go in different contexts. And it's so prevalent around us. It's in the family, the public arena, at schools, or wherever there's armed conflict, to mention a few. A look at the local or national media will give you a picture of the kinds of violence children are exposed to locally. It comes in many forms, and it can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be sexual. This often comes from those the children trust the most, those they have confidence in to protect them. And it affects children negatively. It harms them emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Children exposed to violence more often than not have difficult. They suffer from depression or mental health issues. They're very often engaged in criminal behaviors, even to adulthood. Well, you wonder where do these acts of violence occur? First, the home, the family. Children experience abuse and neglect by family members, parents, uncles, aunties, sisters, brothers, you name them. Children very often at home are exposed to sexual abuse by relatives. That uncle that touches the girl in the wrong places, the nanny that has been brought into the house that is touching the little boy. Yes, boys get abused because it's not noise. As a professional in the field of education, I do know that more boys are abused than girls. They go through things like homicide, infanticide. Very often, this is not spoken about. This is not shared. We don't get to hear about them. Some end up being maimed for life from home, from the kind of beatings that the children are exposed to by family members. We go into the school, we have bullying, other forms of violence, like corporal punishments, psychological aggression. I'm used to teachers who just sit down and cuss the child out. Some even go to the extent of telling them, you never amount to anything good. In the public, in schools, you also face bullying, which is very often being heard of these days. In the public, a child is not exempt. When a child gets in the public sphere, they're exposed to things like child trafficking, kidnapping, sale of children, sexual exploitation, child labor, commercial sexual exploitation, cyber or online violence, to just mention a few. When we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, number 16, and we consider what we have in our country, Nigeria, the goal says that we should promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. I would say that as a nation, we have failed our children. Our children are fast becoming an endangered species, except something is done very fast. Often these infractions against our children are not brought to public attention, nor are they reported to proper authorities. And even when they are reported to the proper authorities, action is not being taken. In 2003, hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, because I was cut off a little while. In spite of the Child Act, I'll just continue, of 2003, for us to create a state of emergency, because this has not been taken seriously. So the theme is very timely. Our theme is very timely and appropriate at this time. And the young man from the Deeper Life College it that this has happened in our no child is safe anywhere. So there's a need for us to take action fast. Every one of us has a role to play in ensuring the palpable menace that this has caused to the children and their future. The families, our educational system, and the socioeconomic development of our country is termed and very fast from the different perspective on violence against children. We have seasoned men and women who are also experts in their fields, and they'll be talking about this from the point of the family as it affects violence against children. We'll be looking at busy parents. We'll be considering government's responsibility to ensure a safe environment for children. From the responsibility of government, the home, and the school in ensuring that we have a viable and conducive environment to raise our children. We'll also be looking at the mental health perspective. We'll be looking at the trauma and the emotional health issues raised from all of this. We'll be looking at an analysis of all parties involved, because everyone from the person being victimized and the person victimizing are all victims. From the media perspective, we'll be looking at media and entertainment, how entertainers 2 days ago, a professional colleague posted on a young man in Lagos State, in Orile at a school, who was flogged by the principal. Initially, when I saw the picture, I did not know it was the back of a human being. I initially saw it and thought, oh, this is a carpet or something, but I saw the young man. Why would a principal flog a young man to that state? It simply, confuses me. Whatever the child would have done, I'm not sure he deserves such treatment. Keep posting, and more people are going to see. Legal and regulatory policies. This is another perspective that we'll be looking at today. We want to say the past, the present, and the future of the laws in respect of violence against children. How adequate is the Child Rights Act of 203, or what should be done? Should we add to it? Should we take away from it? We'll be considering that. And then finally, we'll be talking about this from the perspective of the school environment. We'll be looking at school owners and stakeholders' responsibility on violence against children in the school environment. What are they doing? What are the parents, the PTA doing? How involved are both parties in ensuring that the school environment is safe? We believe that our theme, stay, violence against children, creating the future, every child matters, will address critical modalities in dealing with recurrent issues of violence against children. Remember that every child has a right to survive, a right to have a name, a family life, a private life, to perform some kind of recreation or take part in recreational activities or cultural activities, services, and good health. He has a right to be educated and to have sound education. And every child must be protected from discrimination of any kind. This call is for us all to participate and rise up from this seminar and take action based on what we have learned from the seminar. We have to all say no to deaths, severe injuries, unintended pregnancies, communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases that our children are exposed to as a result of poor standards of living and health conditions. We must say no to brain and nervous system breakdown in our children as a result of violence. We have lost opportunities and growth of our future as our future generation due to violence. We lost dear Sylvester Oromini, allegedly beaten up by friends in the hostel. This is very sad because if our children were protected, this would never have happened. Yes, the school says it didn't happen in our gates, but somebody has to be responsible for this child, and somebody has to do something to help this child. We lost Karen Hapuk under very sad circumstance. Once a young lady asked me, said, "Ma, what is my crime as a girl child? Must I always be exposed to rape? Must I be forced to sleep with somebody I don't like? Is it a crime to be born a girl?" And this came from a secondary school child. That resonates with me when I think of Karen Hapuk and what she had to go through, the pain to the point of her death. There's so much for us all to put our hands together and do. A lot has taken place. We can no longer close our mouths, shut our eyes. There is a need for us to take action. It is not just about, it is the entire society, every one of us. There is a need for us to enforce a state of emergency. Save our children. That is a heart cry. As a mother, it grieves me each time I open the news and I read about something happening to a child somewhere. Some old man raping a young child, some uncle, some auntie, some young girl being ambushed. It is very painful. I have become so protective of my children that even at 20-something, I wouldn't let my daughter walk alone. I didn't grow up in such an environment. We have to do something. Hence, there's a need for us to enforce this. There is a need for there to be an emergency, to be considered an emergency to enforce this. And it's not just about the governor's child. It's not about the senator's child. It's about the market woman's son. It's about the carpenter's child, the cobbler's daughter. It's about every child in Nigeria. We need to do something. And so this is a call for us all to participate. Let us all leave this place knowing that we hold a stake in making something happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emily Ajisebutu. Thank you for that passionate speech to set off this event. She has absolutely covered everything that we definitely will be discussing today. And thank you very much for those points, for that contribution to this discussion. Well, at this point, we're going to move on to our next speaker, and how it's going to carry on now is that for each of our panelists, I will be introducing them. They will be speaking to their area of expertise, as it were, fleshing out the details that our keynote speaker has used a broad stroke, broad brush to paint in broad strokes. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Funmi Ogbue, who wears quite many a hat. She's the president and co-founder of Women in Energy Network, and was honored to be listed by NIPRO as one of the global top 40 under 40 female professionals in 2008. Other honors she's received include Track Africa Humanitarian Personality of the Year, African Female Impact Leadership Award, Cloud Project of the Year, Project 100 Beneficiary, and Oracle CX Cloud Specialist Partner. She holds an MSc in Organizational Change and Development from the University of Manchester and a Bachelor in Science in Sociology from the University of Lagos. She's happily married with children. Ms. Ogbue, with all these hats that you wear and all this busyness, how do busy parents nowadays have this balance so that their kids don't just flop under the radar?
Thank you so much for that wonderful question. And I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone who is participating in this webinar. I'd also like to acknowledge the presentation, very eloquent presentation and worrisome presentation that has just been made or delivered by the keynote speaker. I think it really highlights all the issues. And I'd like to thank the organizers for bringing us all together to discuss this all important topic. As you've said, I wear many hats, but the one that I'm most proud of, and I would like to speak about today, obviously, is the one of a mother. And, you know, I looked up the definition of mothering, which unfortunately society has really moved on from. And it has words in there, you know, like protecting, nurturing, training, delivering a child into this world. So fundamentally, the role of protecting, nurturing, and training and delivering a child is the mother's. Having said that, the definition of family, you know, in previous times, historically, families were described as a family unit, which was the man, the wife, and the children. And then you had extended family, which were the grandparents. Because of economy, and this was the foundation of society. However, because of changing economic trends, we've had the introduction into that concept of family of people like the nannies, who are referred to as aunties. You have the uncles, the aunties, the teachers, all kinds of people. The drivers have now become members of the family. And in some instances, even the people in the offices where the parents work have been introduced into the family unit. They have been introduced into the family unit without the blood attachment, without the commitment, without, remember the words that I described, the nurturing, the protecting, the training, that responsibility. So these are people that have now got responsibility over this child, but they don't have the commitment, they don't have the connection. And so you have violence. A lot of children are bullied, they are spanked, they are raped, they are touched, they are, emotionally manipulated. When the nannies want to get something from the mom, they say, oh, if you don't do it, I'm going to, so the children are used to satisfy urges. They, when somebody goes and gets drunk, or smokes too much weed or drugs, this poor child is the punching bag. And the mother is not aware, does not know what's going on. Because maybe the mother too has gone off to work, or has all day they're tired, or they've gone off to their friends. There's a lot of social activities that mothers are doing. And we forget that the responsibility, the primary responsibility of protecting, nurturing, and training is that of the mother. And in foreign countries, a lot of them have come together and made national commitments, like in the UK, which is what a lot of us in Nigeria look up to. We look up to the UK. Most moms in the UK do not work. They don't work. And even when they work a certain number of hours, and they know that their responsibility is to look after their children. So they pick up their children, they look after them. They don't have all these nanny business, not because they can't afford it. They have more money than us. They're more prosperous, but because they understand, they've all come together at some point in their history to make a commitment, a national commitment against violence of children. And so they've come and said, no, the mother has to look after the child, has to protect the child. And so in my case, I have worked all my life, but my work is always around my children. I don't abandon them. I protect them against, a lot of the people who do not have that blood commitment, blood connection with them. So I think, I'm not sort of saying everyone should emulate me, but I think fundamentally the role of protecting, nurturing, and training children belongs to the mother. And that I'd like to leave it there.
Thank you very much, Funmi. Also, from your bio, you are a sociologist. I wear that hat too. My degree is also in sociology, the best course in the world, allow me to say. What do you think, and since sociology studies cause and effect, well, how do you think we got here? What are some of the social realities that have brought us to this situation where violence against children, bullying, and the like are such a rampant issue?
I think the fundamental reason that we got here is what I was alluding to in the blurring of the lines of the family unit, the expanded description of what a family is. So people have been put in charge of children that do not have the role or the connection to look after that child. And so if the child cries, they give the child a slap because there's no, they don't really understand why they're there, what that child is in their care. And they don't also really understand the impact that slap has on that child. They don't understand that that child is not a conduit for getting benefits from mommy or from daddy. This is like from the drivers or the nannies. They don't understand that. They don't have no connection. They don't have that love. or that nurturing to that child, so that's one major cause. The other thing is, the other reason that I see is that we don't have, in Nigeria, we don't really have a census. So we don't even know how many family units that we have. And even if we did, people would struggle to define, how many are in their family. So I believe that have a big role to play in planning, in understanding that society needs to return back to that original family unit. So I think that's one big issue. The other issue you have is, that I've seen is the cause, is when there are too many people living in a house. So there's no space, there's not enough room for people to vent, unwind. And so there's a lot of pent-up anger and violence and, sort of people living on top of each other. And that causes people to react in a violent manner. The third thing that I see that has caused an increase in violence against children, sadly, is substance alcohol abuse. When people have economic challenges, they turn to drink or substance abuse. And who bears the brunt of that is the weak, either the mother or the children. There's someone that has abused alcohol, and so their senses are a bit impaired. And they feel like, they have all the problems in the world because perhaps they don't have enough. They feel that they're not adequately employed. So on that earning going, I think is, I'd like to highlight here is the role of school. Unfortunately, we don't have social workers are looking out for the signs of abuse in children. Because that doesn't exist, the schools tend to be the ones that are like the ones watching out for violence in children and making sure that other children don't cause violence. But I'm not sure the extent to which our teachers are trained in what to look out for and the telltale signs. And like I said, if we sort of wind it back to the mother is not also really paying attention anymore and looking out for, okay, when this child comes back from school, let me check their body. How are they? Who has touched them or not touched them? There's not a lot of that going on with our moms anymore. So I think the sociological shift in society has a major impact on this particular topic of violence against children.
Thank you very much. The very last question I might send your way is, based on what you know as international best practice, what would you say is the most critical thing that we have to get right if we're going to develop an institutional framework that protects the Nigerian child?
I think there are three things that we must get right. The first one is that we must have a national commitment. We must all come together and say enough, enough. This is not, we cannot produce monsters. It's either you have a child or you don't. And in civilized countries, that's why you see them having one child or two children. Like no one has 5 or 6 or 12 anymore, because the mothers know they can't cope with protecting and nurturing 12 children. So I think the whole country needs to come together to say, when we say have one child, it's not because we think you can't feed that child, but you can't protect 12. So have the one that you can protect and you can nurture. Have the one that you can live within your means and still look after. So I think that's very important, that there's an understanding that the number of children that people have is commensurate with the amount of violence that be perpetrated on those children. So, the whole Child Rights Act, the law, has to take into cognizance how many children, how they should be protected, what are the rights of those children. So there should be an act that just really describes these things. So the legal framework, the policy framework needs to be there. It's very important. And then the third thing is the community. The role of the community. There needs to be a lot of development and training. So the parents need to understand their role and their rights. The child themselves need to be trained on what you should accept or not accept. And when somebody, like in this country, in the UK, from about age 8, they start teaching children about sexual bullying. But in Nigeria, I don't think there's any such thing around education. So there needs to be a lot of education on the children, encourage them to speak up. I've looked into a lot of studies that utilize social media as a way of understanding child abuse and neglect and collecting data. And so that's one way. And then the final thing is schools, mass awareness. There needs to be a lot of work with educating schools, giving them the tools around how to protect and prevent harassment, bullying, and violence against children. In that national commitment, I think one of the things that we still do in Nigeria is one of the most violent against children that I have seen. I'll give you an example. You go to an event and a child is sitting down. The first thing they will say, an adult will come and say, get up. How can an adult be standing and a child is sitting? And for me, that's fundamental. We cannot have standing and a child sitting and it's a problem. So we have to really come together and agree. What do we, these children, are they really precious eggs that we should protect or what? Let's agree as a country. In the UK, for example, if you spank a child, it's against the law. You can't. But in Nigeria, we still believe that when you beat children is when you beat sense into their heads. It's not true. You are damaging that human being. You are producing a monster, a thief and a monkey. And we need to understand that. So for me, I think those three elements, coming together as a country, having national commitments, which includes us as families, the lawmakers, the regulators, the educators, everyone come together. Let's agree a few things, around how we want to see our future, which is our children, and then put in place all the policy frameworks, and then position the community, so the children, the school, in a way that they can properly implement all these things by constant training, monitoring, and evaluation. And I think if we did those three things really well, then we would be in a good stead to carry on the work. I mean, of course, it's not one day and it never finishes. Protecting children is the reason a country exists.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ogbue. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your contributions. We definitely will circle back to you as questions are made available, and also for some final thoughts. But thank you very much for your succinct submissions.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we move on to Coach Sam Obafemi, who is a mental health, trauma, and emotional intelligence expert. He'll be speaking to the perspective that addresses the mental health impact of childhood trauma as a result of impacted violence on the child, amongst other issues. Coach Sam, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much for making out the time. We do know that you have another engagement, so we'll try to make this as quick as possible. Does bullying actually scar people? I know that in Nigeria, like Funmi spoke a bit about this. Hey, grow up. That's what they do us before. What really What real impact does bullying and childhood trauma have on children?
Thank you. I am grateful for the opportunity to share, and I'm going to be writing on Funmi's contribution succinctly, and every of the points she's made are valid. To answer your question directly, bullying has ramifications that many of us do not even understand and we never appreciate. Bullying has very severe impact on the mind of any adult. And coming from the perspective of mental health, there's what we call adverse childhood experiences. And this happens to anyone in the first 18 years of their lives. So it means that if the experiences of any adult any child in their first 18 years have everything to do with what they become as adults. Adverse childhood experiences suggest that adults have tendencies for dysfunctional behavior and also even early death in their lives, by suicide. Bullying affects three things in the life of a child. The first is cognitive, because when you are suffering from bullying, especially when you are still around the bully, when you're still feeling the physical presence of the bully, or when you know that every day you're going to encounter the bully, you'll find that such a child begins to lose concentration and focus. Many parents are not able to tell why their kids' grades are dropping. Many parents cannot understand why their kids are forgetful. Many parents are not able to understand why their kids are not able to hold conversations and have, civil engagements. Many parents do not understand why they're aggressive at the slightest of provocations. And this can come directly from bullying, because you are not able to think through your options. You don't feel like you have options. Sometimes kids are trying to call our attention to bullying experiences. And like you said, we just wave it up like, everybody did not find it easy. So you too, you have to brace up and face it hard. So we need to understand that is a direct consequence. The second consequence to bullying is what we call social impairment. Social impairment. And social impairment is that we develop the degradation of relationships. We're not able to build functional relationships. A bullying experience is not resolved. The person consciously presses you to transfer, the aggression, especially because you want to be able to have your way. Let's put it this way. If I cannot tackle my bully, I have to vent to someone else to be able to reestablish my power and essence, because the bully has made me feel less of myself. My self-esteem is tampered with. My confidence is tampered with. My ego is scarred. I need to reestablish that. That's the essence of being human. Somehow we feed off ego, we feed off our psyche. We can never submit to not being competent. So when someone is losing self-confidence and self-esteem, one angle, they have to reap impairment, because you find that you begin to have dysfunctional relationships, you begin to demonstrate abusive tendencies, you begin to demonstrate aggressive tendencies, you're demonstrating intolerant tendencies, and that makes you lose relationships. So when you find someone, an adult, for instance, who is rigid or who is intolerant or who is impatient or who is, not able to let other people have their way or come to that point where they can approach balance and flexibility, if you trace it, they probably are still suffering from the impact of bullying when they were children. The third consequence to bullying is emotional impairment. And this has to do with the inability to trace and feel what you feel. As kids, when a child is bullied, their first preoccupation is fear, and they're trying their best to remove themselves from the situation or from the person. But we have not, especially in Nigeria, or let me say Africa, we have not been trained to know our feelings. We have not been trained to track our feelings. We lump our feelings into one word. So we have not been trained to know, do I feel agitated? Do I feel afraid? Do I feel angry? Do I feel, so we're not able to identify, know what we really feel. So even as adults, when you say, how do you feel? You hear people say, I'm okay. I'm fine. People are not able to say, I feel unhappy. I feel disturbed. I feel so. Fewer people are able to trace their feelings to be able to know, because I feel this way, this is where it is coming from. Because if you do not know precisely how you feel, you're not likely to trace the source of that specific feeling. And if you don't trace the source of that specific feeling, you're not able to resolve the source of that specific feeling. So these three impairments are direct consequences of adverse childhood experiences: cognitive impairment, social impairment, and emotional impairment. And when people become adults, now, when they transfer that to the workplace, for instance, you begin to find supervisors who are insecure. You begin to find workmates who are unhealthily competitive. You begin to find people in the workplace who backbite or who snitch on each other just to get the new promotion. You find people who abuse of power is a result of course, adverse childhood experiences, mismanagement of authority, and all these vices we find in the workplace. And even in our primary direct consequences to bullying. And I think that this conversation is very timely because we cannot have enough of this conversation. Bullying has given rise to, and like they say in adverse experiences, when any parent has experienced at least one ACE, you are likely to have children that would experience ACE, adverse childhood experience. There are 10 different factors that a person is suffering from ACE. And these have far-reaching effects even to children and children's children. So it's not a one lifetime situation. It's something that continues to transfer from parents to children and takes up the society. Is the question.
Thank you very much, Sam. Something you said that stood out for me is the fact that just because a person doesn't know how they feel doesn't mean that they won't react based on how they feel. So you go to a doctor, maybe you have aches and pains physically, and okay, how do you feel? And lots of times we struggle to even tell the doctor about our physical pain.
Yes.
But we still show the
Yes.
symptoms, we still have the pain, we still have the disorder or the disease. And so it is also emotionally. And so even though people don't know how they feel, it doesn't stop them from reacting in that way. So
yes,
what are some of
yes.
these immediate factors that have exacerbated violence against children, like rape, the molestation, the bullying that we're seeing in these unfortunate stories? So you're saying that a lot of this stems from how people feel and the fact that they've suppressed that for so long?
Thank you. Good question. So everything we do is directly tied to how we feel. Every human action is tied to a feeling. And every human feeling is tied to a thought, is tied to an impression, an interpretation to an experience or an event or a person or a place. There's a direct correlation. So all actions are tied to feelings. It means that if I feel a particular way, the natural behavior is to act in line with that feeling. So when people are bullied, let's now go and face the bully. Who is a bully? A bully is any human being that feels a particular way that warrants the action called bullying. So what do they feel? It's either they feel unheard, oppressed, suppressed, frustrated, agitated, afraid, ambitious, exuberant. There are ranges of feelings. But you see, one of the mistakes we're making in Nigeria now is we're looking for culprit bullies. We're looking for a bully to use as a scapegoat so that we can say, oh, we're tackling bullying. We're not looking at what makes a bully a bully. What are the attendant feelings that a bully has? Because I thought, if I feel frustrated and I become a bully, it's because I am thinking that I'm thinking in a particular way. There is something that makes me feel frustrated. So it's a whole body of work. We need to not create a new problem. In trying to solve bullying, we don't want to create a new problem of demonizing the bullies and now creating a compound challenge. So we need to explore this in a very, very emotionally intelligent way, where what is the root of bullying? What are the factors that constitute bullying? Look at the way, let's look at the classical case of governance. The way the average Nigerian is being governed would, of course, create a lot of bullies, because everyone doesn't feel heard. Well, let me not say everyone. Majority of Nigerians don't feel heard. Majority of Nigerians don't think that they can plan a future from their wage. You cannot honestly say, this is a systematic way I can plan my 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. You cannot confidently say, based on where I am now, I can picture and forecast where my child can be when he or she clocks 30 or 35. We have many adults who are living in their parents' houses because of economic problems. And so these things give rise to feelings, because you're thinking, I am 30, I'm 31, I'm 32. I'm living in I can't even sustain myself. So it gives rise to feelings of frustration and pain and anger. Then you go out to the market, you're trying to buy something and somebody is trying to, maybe the price is high and you feel like, no, you're trying to cheat me, and then it gets into, so these are ripple effects that these things have. So these are, and then of course you come home, you probably are aggressive at your child needs your attention, you don't feel like you can give them that attention, they feel they are not heard, they go back to school and then they need to vent and unleash their own frustrations on their fellow classmates. So this is like a spaghetti problem. It goes all around, but like you said, all actions are tied to feelings. All feelings are tied to thoughts, and all thoughts are tied to beliefs. What we believe about a situation would inform how we think about the situation. What you think about a situation would inform how you feel about the situation. And what you feel about the situation will determine how you will behave or respond to the situation. That's the way it works.
Thank you, Coach Sam. We have just 2 more minutes with you, so as briefly as possible, do these effects ever wear off?
To answer that question directly, yes. Some of us have been bullied. Some of us have bullied in the past. And the main thing here is everyone in question, how aware do you become? How conscious are you of your behaviors? Because like you guys in law would say, ignorance is not an excuse. The fact that you don't know that your thoughts or your beliefs are influencing how you behave, the first place to start is, and this is why this conversation is very relevant, everyone needs to come to terms with the fact that how I behave may be bullying, how I behave may be introducing trauma to someone else. You know, as simple as how we drive on the road. Someone knows a road is one way, will follow it, and you do not know the trauma it may create for someone whose access to the road you have blocked. We don't see it from these very simple perspectives. You know, we don't know how, you know, for instance, I was on a road trip recently, and someone in the vehicle playing loud music. And sometimes we don't even know that someone else does not need loud music, but you feel like music is music. Now everybody should listen to music. At that time, that person just wants to meditate or concentrate. That is a form of bullying, but we don't see it that way. So we need to be aware that our actions and inactions can impact on people. And then we begin to open ourselves up to more empathetic content, emotional intelligence, understanding the role of kindness, understanding the role of reconciliation. So there are different things, and over time, you will heal. Because trauma, the problem of trauma is that trauma is a physical outcome. It resides in the body, and you would always feel a sense of it. So it takes time to heal. It takes time for your body to outgrow trauma, especially if you're working on your mind by opening up yourself to resources that can help you heal. And as you're healing from your mind, your body is responding to the healing. And over time, you would outgrow. So what happens is, over time, you can remember the incidents, but you are no more scarred. You are no more edgy. You are no more agitated. You are no more tense. Tension is gone. You just remember it, and you're like, you can't feel negative energy from that memory. That is when you know you have healed. So yes, it's possible to heal from these experiences.
Thank you very much, Coach Sam. We do appreciate your contributions. We will circle back to you, of course, with questions and reactions. But thank you very much, Coach Sam.
Thank you.
All right. Well, guess what? I finally got video. So now, for those of you who have never met me, you now know that I'm not like Snuffleupagus from Sesame Street. I actually do exist. But thank you so much to all and sundry for joining us in this wonderful discussion. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Ajisebutu, who will be looking at the legal and regulatory concerns as it pertains to violence against children. Ajisebutu, at this time, would like to ask you, are there actually any available laws that can be used to address violence against children? Because it kind of seems like there are absolutely no laws. Ajisebutu, what would be your reaction to that?
Yes, that's unfortunately, that's what it seems like. But Ofi, I can tell you that we have laws in abundance. We have a very comprehensive law, actually, to protect children. But as typically is the situation here in our clime with laws, we have all of these laws on paper, but giving life to the law in terms of implementation, moving the law from paper to real benefit to the society and to the primary beneficiaries is always a problem. There's a huge, huge disconnect in this regard. So I would say that Nigeria as a state has an obligation to protect children under international law and even under regional laws. Now, at the international level, you're looking at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children. Nigeria has ratified this law. At the regional level, we have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Now, both of these international instruments have very comprehensive, far-reaching provisions to protect the child. And then Nigeria has an obligation under all these laws, both of these laws, to bring the benefit to the children back home. Okay. So in responding to this obligation, Nigeria now took this step to promulgate the Child Rights Act in 2003. Now, because the issue of child's rights is not on the exclusive legislative list, this law, the Child Rights Act 2003, did not have national application. That is to say, it didn't apply across the country and was only limited to Abuja, the FCT, since 2003. But the states were now encouraged to take steps. The different houses of assembly were encouraged to take steps to also to pass these laws by their respective state assemblies. 11 states in the Northwest and Northeast did not do this until just last week, when Borno State decided to distinguish itself and passed this law. So as we speak today, only 26 states and the FCT have this child's rights law in place. And we can only hope that the other 10 states in the southwest and in the northwest and northeast will take a cue from Borno State and do the needful. So that is to say that we have sufficient laws. And I will go in now to point out some of the provisions of the law as it relates to the particular subject of violence against children. So, I told you that the obligation that Nigeria has towards its children is coming from the international level and the regional level. And then it's now come down to Nigeria under this law that I have already identified. So I'll just read you the provision of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 19 in particular. Article 19 in particular is very specific. Now it states that states parties, that is the different countries, shall take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect the child from all forms of physical or mental violence, injury or abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, maltreatment or exploitation, including sexual abuse, while in the care of parents, legal guardians, or any other person who has the care of the child. Now, a similar provision, this is the provision of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, the African Charter on the Rights of the Child has a similar provision. Also placing, almost verbatim, placing the same obligation on a state. Sorry about that. So this obligation is on the state to ensure that this protection is provided to the Nigerian child. Now, if you now go to the Child Rights Act itself, it has provision on the child's right to dignity. The child has a right to dignity. And then this is where it now also makes provision. It said every child is entitled, this is now section 11 of our Child Rights Act 2003, that every child is entitled to respect for the dignity of his person, his or her person. And accordingly, no child shall be subjected to physical, mental, or emotional injury, abuse, neglect, or maltreatment, including sexual abuse, be subjected to torture, inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment, or subjected to attack upon his honor or reputation, and all of that. So it tells you that the law recognizes the right of the child to live a life free of violence, and that the primary responsibility is on the state, on the country, in our case, the Nigerian government, to take all necessary steps, putting the necessary legislature in place, taking the administrative actions that are required, and every other step that will be required to protect this child from violence in every aspect of the child's life. Hello, Fia, are you there?
Yes, I am. I was just wondering if you had landed your plane, but thank you very much.
On the issue of violence per se, and then when the keynote speaker in her speech, she made a comment about punishment in school and the level of injury inflicted on children in school. And I will tell you quickly that that is against the law. It's unlawful to inflict that kind of punishment. So the law recognizes the need to discipline a child, but the law is very clear that the discipline should be disciplined at the age of the child and must be such discipline that does not inflict injury and violence on a child. So when you begin to flog a child, cane a child, or like she said, she saw the back of the child and all of that, now that is a crime. That is torture of a child, which is clearly prohibited by our law.
And the FCT. How come we're not seeing sanctions based on the provisions of this law?
So that is the problem of Nigeria. And that's why we are where we are, today. Because one, the states, like I said to you, has a responsibility to put all the measures in place to popularize this law and police units. But I don't know if you have ever heard of that unit. The unit does not even exist. I know the closest that they have is the gender unit, which they were pressured to establish pursuant to the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, the VAP Act.
And it's still very inadequate.
Yes, very grossly inadequate. So the law has made provision for the steps that the government, that the state should take, but these steps have not been taken. So the problem is the problem of implementation. You would always hear about challenges with government, capacity, resources, and all of those things. So this is what it is, They have not made the welfare and protection of the child a priority.
Thank you very much, Ogechi. My last question to you would be, as we see all these loopholes, how do we get to the place, what needs to be done to ensure that this law has some teeth, that we insist that this Child Rights Act of 2003 actually begins to put people in the slammer, that some people are actually being sanctioned? What needs to be done to get this thing over the finish line?
I would say advocacy, making demand on the government. Something like what we are doing now, it is expected that a communique will emanate from this exercise, and then it would form the basis of some advocacy to the state, because the laws are already in place. The provisions are there. It is now just a question of activating the laws. So for instance, the law also has an implementation committee. The law makes provision for an implementation committee, which has the responsibility to monitor how this law is being enforced, how it is progressing. But I doubt that the implementation committee is even in place. So these are some of the demands that we can begin to make by advocacy, to demand that the relevant steps that should be taken under the law be taken. Set up the implementation committee, set up the relevant unit in the police force, strengthen all the relevant government agencies which should play a role under the law.
I would begin with that the entertainment of a people, particularly the music of a people, is actually the best judge of their character. If you've ever thought that the best judge of character is persons, no, it's actually what persons like. I find that the art, the entertainment, the music of a people is the best judge of their character. And we unfortunately like to divorce entertainment from the realities of our lives, but everything is subsumed. That's why you have such a statement as the soundtrack of our lives. Everything is subsumed and summarized for outsiders in the music of a people. And the power of music goes to the root of culture, because culture is transferred by oral tradition. Everybody is not a reader of books. And history is replete with enough examples of this. There was the era when print was not available and things were transferred by music. For example, we grew up in Senegal, Gambia, Orange, Limpopo, Zambezi back in school days. And it was put into music to help us. So education was done by music. So many things are done by music. Cultural exchange by music, history by music. So that's the power of a people from generation to generation. It is a form of oral tradition. It is the summary of who a people are. Now, however, because social realities are progressive, And from generation to generation, there are incursions from other climes. Musicians will be the first picture window to that change. So when cultures change and cultures evolve, art is usually one of the first forms that help you realize and find and trace the change as it occurs in each climb. So relative to children are the most impressionable. They have minds that are very impressionable, minds that are very, as it were, spongy, that can easily retain what it is that musicians, artists put out. And this is where I'm going to speak to the challenge of what I call simplism. By simplism, I'm speaking of the oversimplification of the fact that if my music video or my artistic expression does not objectify a child, I have not in any way done any damage to a child. And then we oversimplify even further by what I call the politics of tags and labels. Once you just put 18 and you put R, that means that it's enough. But we forget that privacy, or as it were, once you make a thing private, it begs curiosity, it heightens the desire. So there's a curse of as it were, what's the word now, of censorship, that you must speak to the social reality that human nature craves what is banned. And that then devolves to the parents to have to do the work of monitoring what their children watch, what their children listen to. However, there's no better place to deal with an issue than from its source. Sometimes we put too much of a burden on parents. They cannot be everywhere at every time. There are social contradictions take place in other spaces where your children will be and you are not. What you would allow within the confines of your home or not allow, other people would disallow or allow as they see fit. And if you don't share the same values, but for whatever reason, life leads your children there, then they are exposed to contradictions to your own values that they have to contend with. And once it's gone into their minds, as I said, because it's impressionable and it's spongy, you can't take it away. And it then devolves to questions. We must put more of make more demands of artists, of musicians, particularly of people in the arts, to be a bit more responsible and to recognize that we owe a duty of care to keep our content, our expressions artistically conscious of the collective shared values of a nation, and to realize that the future of a country of a people, so the future is what current generations would, as it were, see as the to do and to be of their lives. So I feel that we give too much of a slap on the wrist and to us artists and musicians, and we tend to dismiss the conversation easily to the gallery of morality and religion, and say, no, that's because you are a pastor, you're a Christian, everybody cannot do music like that. Thick approach and outlook to it is acceptable. There must be national values to which we're all collectively subscribed, and we must demand that the artistic expression of any artist, entertainer at all must speak to that and must serve that. And where they fall short of that, we must not only go to banning, but actually demand that people be subjected to orientation to see the need and to get their buy-in to using their arts to help shape the minds of young people. It's not enough that you don't objectify children by using them as characters in a music video, for example, if I use music. But if you mess adults up, and adults are the parents of children, the ripple effect, it will trickle down to children. It was William Wordsworth who said in 1802 in his poem, I think I leap up. I think that's what the poem was titled. he said the child is the father of the man. That oxymoron simply means that what the man becomes is born from what the child was. However, the question is, how did the child get his identity? It came from the parents. So if you are doing music for the parents and the parents are damaged, you don't have to say it's not for the children, because eventually these are the parents that will interact with children and ultimately will damage children. So for me, I think the first thing we need to get out of the way is simplism, oversimplification of the issues, and be a bit more broad, be a bit more direct. We need to take out the whole pretense of labeling any attempt at more stringent censorship and regulation as being religious, as being in the territory of morality. We have to understand that there must be shared values that they are just for us to build a great society. And for us to achieve that, we must demand better of our artists, because they are the repositories, the historians, through the form, the idiom of art of our collective identity. So yeah, that's by way of response to your question, how it impacts children. Damaged parents will damage children, and if artists are serving parents with poison, it will get. That's it.
You literally answered every single question I had for you. Because I was going to ask you about the role of parents. I was going to ask you about how parents themselves are affected. I was going to ask you about religion. You touched on that. Maybe the only thing that I might want for you to flesh out before we go to our last speaker, Emily is actually going to speak. You touched on religion. And Nigeria is actually very Islam or Christianity. We don't play with our religion. How do you think that we have fared in that regard? Because we've seen, there was a time where we thought that sending a child to a Christian school or a missionary school was a protection for them. Unfortunately, we've seen that is not the case. So how, in your way, how has religion fared? And what is it that we need to get right when it comes to religious institutions in protecting children?
Well, I mean, I understand the sentiment and why you'd ask me that question, because I'm actually a church pastor. So I understand that wearing that cap would make you ask me that question. If you take a summary, do a research as to the subscriber base of many of the telcos in Nigeria, I want to use that analogy. You find that it's not the number of subscribers that are necessarily active. So by that, I'm saying the first thing, again, we like to oversimplify and just use numbers as a slapstick and assume that once the numbers say so and so, data is sacred. Not always. What data says is does not mean that's what that actually is. And by that, what I mean is there are many Christians and many Muslims, but how many Christians and Muslims have gone beyond the threshold of being nominal? That's the reality. How many Christians and Muslims really subscribe to the values of their faith? For example, subscribe to the values of Christianity. I'm a pastor. There are certain kinds of music you should not even listen to. It should not even be within your space. But then we break it down to no, it's harmless, it's just music, it's just entertainment. But by your playlist, I know your character. That's the actual reality. And that's what I've been saying. You're characterizing your playlist. Since when did signs of danger, skulls become cool? That people will use the signs in their videos, and then when we talk about it, it's because they bring it down to it's being creative, it's being artistic. Actually, the standard of creativity must be pushed to such levels that you can accomplish the same stimulation, the same draw the same reaction and energy from people without going beyond the borders of being suggestive. If you have to go beyond being suggestive to actually being lewd and completely stuck, then that means maybe you're not as creative as you say you are. But guess what? That's what is the muse of many of us. And who are the culprits? Christians and Muslims, because music, like every other industry, art like every other industry, is based on the premise of demand and supply. If there are no people, no customers, there'll be no service providers. We have customers. That's why we can do the nonsense that we do, without thinking of the effect wholesale on society and on the future. That's why I'm wearing this shirt that says future. We're shortchanging and mortgaging the future each time we excuse artistic expressions. But the gatekeepers should be the religious. But I'm telling you that even as a pastor, when I interface and engage directly with even members of my own congregation and across board, I find that not even many Christians are as invested in the values of their faith as they mouth and as they claim. If we're Christian enough, certain things will not be bought. Who are the customers? Who is buying it? Who's paying for it? When you go to some of these funny concerts where women are objectified, their body parts are made, the cynosure. Who pays for tables there? Who are the corporate and what do you call them now? The public communications officials in some of these corporate bodies that sponsor these kinds of concerts. Who puts money behind this? These are Christians. These are people who go to churches, who go to mosques, who say they are believers in God and do completely opposite things. So it is when we are ready for the conversation and we're ready to be Christian and Muslim and whatever enough, that these things will change. I think that's the first issue. Then the second part is we have to actually understand that expertise is limited within the confines of religion, and religion must be ready to embrace expertise, as long as expertise does not erode the values of our faith. I am not understand why we have not come to the realization yet, especially in the Christian circles, that expertise is actually a manifestation of God. Something I tell them in my church, for example, is that the gift of healing has mutated. The gift of healing is not only when I lay hands on you and say, rise up and be healed. It's also the gift of healing when a doctor receives ideas on how to deal with, COVID and all of that. That's why the Bible calls it gifts of healings. And you see that in the scriptures. So the need to collaboration between religious leaders and professionals is very important. That assumption that the only people God uses are religious leaders is quite it sells us short and impacts you ultimately, because we then get the full value of first manifestation of God's Spirit in the entire Bible was for skilled work. There was a man named Bezalel and another man named Oholiab. And God said to Moses, I have put my spirit on Bezalel and Oholiab so that they have ability and skill in all manner of craftsmanship. And then the first manifestation of the Spirit of God himself was in the work of God in general, set things in place so that the word of God, commanding light and other things, can be. So God's first expression spiritually is actually professionally. So I feel that we need to see the need to collaborate, that there should be a nexus between the two, as long as we're not sabotaging the values of faith through professionalism. The two can work together for us to, it can become the hand, the extension of faith. So those are the two issues. Sincere, active subscription to the values, and secondly, collaboration between leaders will help us in the long run. That's it, sir.
Wow, thank you very much. Such a brilliant submission. Most greatly appreciate your thoughts. We definitely will come back to you. I'm pretty sure there's some follow-ups to the gems that you've just shared. But thank you very much, Toasty Martins, for your contributions this afternoon.
Pleasure. Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, our keynote speaker at this point is going to make her submissions with 33 years experience in this one sector. She definitely has a lot to contribute as we address the issue of violence against children, especially in the education sector. This time I bring back on Emily Ajisebutu to make her thoughts known. We've heard the stories. We've unfortunately seen the names. Unfortunately, some people have passed on. And so I want to ask you, Ms. Ajisebutu, what is it about the Nigerian landscape that makes bullying so rife in schools? You've been in education for 33 years. That's a whole generation. What is it that you've seen that makes it so rife?
Good afternoon, and thank you once again. At least this time, there's a face to the name. I want to say that in our culture, like I said at the beginning, and I think one of the other speakers alluded to it, we're very violent people. It is seen as nothing for us to spank a baby who is not even up to 1 year. And we don't see it as we're spanking the child, but we see it as we're correcting the child. Because all we know about correction, it's beat the child, give some corporate punishment, and the harder it is, the more we think we have done well. So the average adult has experienced some form of violent reaction as a child, and they've ended up growing up with it. So aggression is in us. We're a very aggressive set of human beings. And so it's nothing for us to turn around to beat this child. And so a child comes from home where he has seen he or she himself has been beaten. He or she has been beaten regularly. Somebody's beating somebody, somebody's doing something, hurting somebody. So naturally, it looks normal to them. If we recall what the second speaker, Sam, said about when you've been bullied yourself, you want to bully back. You want to go and take it out on the others. And many times we see people with low self-esteem, and the only way they feel important is by doing something hard. And they kind of feel fulfilled. I've hurt somebody. I did this, so they will know I'm strong. These are all the things that we carry over, and it comes into school, unfortunately. Most times in school, we have to deal with children from different homes. How family A raises their child is different from family B. So you remember A to Z. We have all kinds of families in school. Some family violence is nothing. Other families may have trained their children and taught them to be non-violent. So those kind of children easily are victims to those who have learned and grown up with violence. You come into school and there's no rule in the school. The school has not laid down rules concerning things like bullying. There's no policy on what a child should do, how they should behave. So violence is going to be rife. The teachers themselves, the staff themselves, nobody has given them a policy on how to relate or what to do. So when a child does wrong, naturally, from experience, violence is what they can do. So it's difficult for us to control this as a people, as a nation, because it's rife, it's in our society. It's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of talking to. It's going to take a lot of intentional training for school owners, parents, to take this out of their children and get it out of the school system. Unfortunately, we come to school, we all say we want education for our children. I have seen a father who said to me, I told my child, let everybody know that you are strong. You are not just there for them to push over. Now, is that a good advice? What do you think the child is going to do when he gets to school? Of course, he's going to beat everybody. You see parents who come in themselves to school to fight. They're fighting the teacher in front of the child. They're fighting other students in front of their child. What are we saying? This all comes from home, the way we were trained and how we grew up as persons. I think Mr. Sam really spoke about this. So I'm not going to go to the psychological aspect of it. But what are we doing as a school? What rules have we laid down? How much have we allowed the parents to be involved in our policy making? Do we have policies in every school that protects the child? Policies that talks about what kind of behavior or conduct is acceptable in our schools? Many times we admit children, we write things in our prospectus, we come into school. No, but many schools really don't have policies. No parent signs policies. And for the parents who comes to school, a lot of them think because I'm paying so much for this education, so I can go off and go and do my business and I have no time because the school will take care of my child. We need to make parents understand that the school's duty is to educate your child. It's not their duty to raise your child. You have to raise your child at home the way you want the child to grow up and to perform in society. The school can only complement your own effort, but it can't be thrown at them because your child is in school with me. If we look at the average calendar, the time spent in school, children are more at home than they are with the schools they're in. Schools will only complement what parents have done at home. Parents need to do their own homework. We come to the school owners themselves. How many of them have sat down and reviewed their policies over time? They wrote these things from the beginning when they were setting up the school. Nobody has really taken time to review. Nobody has taken time to sit down and say, in the light of what is going on now, what do we do? How do we change this? Most schools are still running. Where they have policies is just a necessity. They must sign this when they come in. That's because the authority is responsible. The Ministry of Education itself would not come and do checks. I'm sorry, but most times when we have ministry officials come, that is the last thing they're going to be looking at. Until recently, when DSVRT was set up, except a school reports, I'm wanting such a body in Lagos State to go to the schools to look at the records. What do you have here? What is going on here? Yes, in schools, we do have records for things like that, but how many schools use them? How many schools record such behavior? Even to discuss with the parents on open days when the parents are in school. How many of our schools will call in the parents to say, hey, this is what your child has done. This is not acceptable. Very few schools will have sanctions for behaviors because most of our schools, remember, have been opened. As much as they're giving service, they need to pay attention also to the needs of the children that are in their care. Most of them are after making their business. There's some children that should not be in school. They should send them out. But the school owners are more concerned, most of them, and I'm not saying all, please, most are concerned about the money they're not going to make. They're not there looking at the child. They're not there looking at what the child is doing to the school. They're ready to cover up, and they will cover up because they want the school image to remain intact. We talk about discipline. Did we show the parents at the beginning, these are the offenses, these are the sanctions? We make them know that it's offensive for your child to do this or to do that. And as a result, this is the sanction that the child would have. Most times parents come into school when you even invite them and you tell them what the child has done. And they're coming to beg you, come and beg you. Would begging resolve the problem with the child? Instead of you to take your child back home and deal with this. Some will beg you and tell you, you know, I'm very busy. I don't have time. Please, you have to help me. It is not the school. We're looking, what are the standards that you emulate? Okay, you go to school. In the time past, I remember we talked about the mission schools. We used to hear our parents talk about mission schools. Most of them, the school formed them in addition to what parents did. I remember growing up and thinking my mother was a witch because invariably when she wasn't home, somebody would tell her everything that went on in her absence. But then I realized the whole society was involved in raising the child. They say it takes a village to raise the child. And so the school community has to see it as a responsibility towards the child also to contribute to their well-being. Most schools would just punish. The child has done this, you punish them, but they don't know the effect or the consequences of their action. We need to teach, we need to have times when we talk. Bullying, for example, until recently, most schools never talked about bullying, but bullying has been there from the beginning. I remember our days in school, we had those seniors that punished us. You had to go and fetch water. You had to do this. They punched your nose, but nobody reacted. But now that it's become so violent and worse, children are harming themselves, maiming each other, we need to talk to the children about it. We need to have regular meetings. Now, most schools, I see a lack in pastoral care. Pastoral care is where you address all these issues. Most schools don't do that. They don't address these issues. They don't talk to the children. Schools are supposed to have a guidance counselor. I know that in the federal government colleges, there are guidance counselors. I don't know about how many private schools have guidance counselors. Most of them, if they do have, how effective are these people at talking to the children? I don't see what is wrong with the school inviting a psychologist, or you call someone like Mr. Sam. I'm sorry, I'm calling his name so much. Let him come to the school, talk to the teachers, talk to the staff, talk to the children, address them on the effect of all this on the mental health of the child. We need to bring people like this into schools, but most schools are negligent. For me, if you ask me, what happened at Darwin, what happened at Premier Lugbe, just points to some negligence and the fact that somebody did not care. Somebody was careless in their duty and responsibility. I don't see why such a thing will happen. There will be telltale signs. If there was somebody talking to these children about all this, we would see, we would know. If we're following up and we've trained our house masters to do their work correctly, you can pick in a child's countenance when something is wrong. You can tell when the child is not telling you something. I know in schools, especially among the boys, there's this oath of boys, a boys' code. Boys don't spill on each other. They have the boys' code. So no matter what a senior boy is doing to a junior, because he doesn't want to be seen to be weak, he will not spill, he will not talk, he will not say what they've done to him. And that has put a lot of children in trouble, because by the time you now find out what is going on, it's late. And this is where our school carers come in. Are we close to the children? Are we loving on these children? Are we there for them? Do we listen? That is so crucial. We don't listen to our children. We need to listen to them. A child said to me, the problem I have with the adults in this school is that they don't listen. They don't listen to you. You need to listen to hear what the child is saying. Sometimes in listening, you will hear more than what the child is saying, because there are some things that are not said that you can pick up. We don't listen to our children. Some people, I don't know how far it's true. I was told that young Sylvester had mentioned to the father, also, I don't know. So it's just something I heard. So I don't want to be quoted on that he didn't want to read. That was a red flag. You could have asked him, why don't you want to go back to school? And you could have confronted the school with this. Why is my child not wanting to go to school? What is going on? That will make the school students or the school to sit up and look into what is going on. Sometimes these children come, they talk to teachers, they talk to the heads, and many of them just dismiss it. My nephew is in a school, is a highbrow school in Ikoyi, and he came home and he complained. And the mother told me, and I said, okay, let me speak to the principal as a professional. And I could tell from her tone of voice that he'd just be talking. He was like, just be talking when you finish. And I said, madam, what is going on? I'm talking to you. Have you done this? Have you done that? How many times as proprietor, as principal, have you to the hostel to look at what is going on there, to surprise them with a visit when they're not expecting you? How many times have you gone in and randomly spoken to children about how they feel, what is going on in the hostel? But we say we have house masters, we have house mistresses. What trainings do we give them? How often do we train them? How prepared are they to take on this responsibility? So a lot needs to be done. And it's both the schools, the government, the regulatory bodies, they have a lot to put into it. We need to review and come up with policies for every school to adopt. We need to come up with policies that will affect every child in every school. And this is what I have to say. If I go on, it will not end.
Thank you very much. We deeply appreciate your thoughts. And wow, that's a wealth of experience that you shared with us. One other thing that I would want to ask you is the issue of PTAs. parent-teacher associations. How relevant could these associations and bodies be, and what needs to be done to position them better to help with the internal protocols of addressing bullying, rape, and violence against children?
Now, first and foremost, the PTA does not just regulate violence. There's a lot more to PTA than that. But it could be one of the objects that they will be looking at. Now, we could involve parents. I always, in my times in school, I've always involved parents in the fact that I keep a record of all parents and what they do. I might have a psychologist, somebody who is able to deal with an issue in school for me. And I will draw on that parent to come and educate us, to come and train us, to come and talk to us about it. Now, PTA can come together and say, this is what the expected standard is for our hostel, for our day students, or whatever kind of school it is. This is what we are expecting. But most times we have PTAs who come to interfere with the day, and the purpose of what they should do is defeated. Clearly defined objectives, clearly defined times. The parents on the PTA feel they have, since I'm here, I can just say what I need to say. I heard of a school, recently I consulted at a school, and I was told of how they laid off the cooks in the school because they were not very good. And the parents gave them an ultimatum saying, if by tomorrow morning you don't restore those cooks, because the way they make eba is the way my son likes to eat eba, you will see what I will do to you. And trust me, this parent came to school the next day, making noise, hula baloo. When the proprietor told me, I said, can I ask you a question? Do you really need this parent? If this parent leaves your school, is your school going to crumble? He said, no. I said, so work her out. You don't need, because for me, every school should have either a PTA with a clearly defined role or a parents forum, so that we can rub minds together, work well together for the good of this galley. And that's what I expect it should be for the PTAs.
Thank you very much. And so we'll go on into the question and answer segment. If there are any questions from participants, please feel free to use the chat box. And if they're for any specific speaker or panelist, you can indicate. If not, we will field them, and any panelist that feels they want to address that, take a stab, they will go ahead. One of the questions I do have, and this would be open to any panelist, when you consider the government, how the government addresses issues like that affect citizens daily, like the Twitter ban, NSARS, and the like. Do you think the younger generation is simply reproducing the same patterns of impunity in terms of being menaces in schools? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Are we just seeing the younger generation repeating the failures of the older? Any panelists want to take a stab at that? Ogechi?
Well, let me attempt. Well, obviously, the society, there's what you call the ripple effect in the society. So as you would hear people say commonly that we deserve the leaders that we get because they come from amongst us, from the society. So if we have a very glaring and high level of impunity and lawlessness, it almost follows that that system will continue to perpetuate itself, because that would be all that the younger generation, that's all that they have seen, all that they know, and all they've learned, and they are likely to also manifest. So we're not likely to get a different outcome by doing the same thing, you know? And sometimes they say that's the definition of madness, when you expect a different outcome from doing the same thing. So I think that if we want to see real change, then it has to be a very conscious thing that we need to start working on from today. There really needs to be a reorientation. And this is what even our foundation tries to talk about, tries to preach, that there needs to be some social change, a social reengineering that has to come from an individual reorientation. Everybody needs to go through that process of relearning. And I really, really have to say that a lot of the responsibility lies on our leaders, because they set the example that the people follow. So it will be very important that if we don't change or do things differently, we are not likely to see a different outcome from the youth.
Thank you very much. I do agree with you that every society does deserve its leaders, and how really it's just a symptom of what's wrong with the larger society. And that's what we're seeing. Any other panelists want to opine on that point? If not, we move on to the next question. So we're seeing that, yes, and I think a couple of you have raised the issue about how there's a difference between discipline and torture. How do we keep that balance? What level of discipline do we need to adopt in schools? Also considering that, you know, the African model of discipline, respect for elders, respect for others, how do we keep the balance of making sure that there's discipline, possibly even sanctions and punishment, but making sure it doesn't descend into torture?
If I may?
I would think that most times schools, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Most times we're a product of where we're coming from, which is also what the former speaker was saying. Children will imitate adults. And so when you're talking discipline, where we are, adults, those are traditional things that we've taken into our everyday life, which we need to reorientate and address. If you must spank a child, I'm not saying don't spank your child, because the Christian would tell me the Bible says I should spank my child. But why spank in anger and then spank the child? There is no point saying I am disciplining a child when the child does not know why it's been made to go through so much pain. And discipline does not have to be pain. We can discipline without inflicting pain. You see mothers in the local environment, one older child beats the younger child and the mother returns by beating the older one. What have we done? We've encouraged violence. So for us to do that, I think that in schools, every school should have sanctions, they should write out what they consider an offense and the prerequisite sanctions to go with it. And let every parent go through this, agree and disagree. Or if there's so much disagreement, let us sit together with the PTA or a parents forum and fashion out what is applicable to our school, what the school should do and what they shouldn't do. I've worked in a school like Grange. Everybody knows Grange in Lagos is exclusive. And I've seen parents walk to me. Grange is a British school. And they say to me, I've had parents, I won't name names, and I mean big parents, big time Nigerians, will walk to me and say, I brought you some cane in case you want to use them. It's not me to cane your child. Go and cane your child at home. I would punish the child the way I deem fit in school. And even for staff, we should regulate what should be done. When I was a junior at school, if a child really irritated me, rather than punish that child, quote unquote, I used to send them to my head to deal with. I referred the child to somebody else to deal with, so that I have time to calm down and that child is out of my purview, so I'm not hurting anybody's child. So I think we should just reorientate people.
Question here in the chat box from Cyril Ofoni. Hello, Cyril. Thank you so much for joining us. Nice to see that you joined. It's been a while. And this, at some point, I thought about this, but it kind of slipped my mind. Tosin wants to have the stab at that, apparently. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes,
I can hear you.
We can.
Okay. All right. Cyril says, what will be your thoughts on a boarding house system in school, seeing that most of these atrocities emanate from there? Similarly, considering child nurturing, can boarding schools be in lieu of parental care? Tosin, I think you want to have a stab at this?
Well, no, actually the last question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. It's a little faint, not as loud as you were before.
I don't know what that is. Let me try and then just get this up again. Is this better?
We can hear you. It's just, it's pretty clear, but it's not as strong as it was when you were making your early submissions.
I don't know why that's happened. Okay, so, I mean, I feel that if the conversation is going to be inclusive, it's a good place to start not to demonize discipline. People are often open to listening when we don't make them feel like they're wrong to discipline the best way they know. And it's easier to receive correction along the lines of, let's show you a better way to do it. Because most times when these conversations are along the lines of discipline, is hard. It's always almost like the African versus the Western. The Western way of disciplining children is not better. It's not better. It's not a case of the African way is worse and the American way is better. We tend to always wander towards that sentiment. What I've found and what I see, and again, I'm sorry, I have to allude to the Bible. The last speaker did say, Christians will say, well, we will not just say the Bible, actually say so, that you spare the rod and you spoil the child. And then she correctly did say that it's a question of how much exertion, how much force, and in what state of mind that is done. Because the reality is children are different. And there are some children that must be spanked because they'll take advantage of the softness in other forms of discipline. And parents should not be quick to use the whip if it's absolutely not necessary. But there are instances where it is necessary. And we mustn't give people a complex or the fear that when they need to do that, they should not do it. That's the only concern that I thought I should raise in that area. It must be in the measure and moderation that does not defeat the purpose of the discipline and in a way that does not inflict injury to children. And I mean, for a parent who lost their child, it's only natural that they should get that. But then if I may, what was your last question? Maybe I can just quickly speak to that.
Are boarding schools relevant anymore? Should we have boarding schools?
Again, I was going to, in my initial submission, talk about the concept of the duty of care. And this is where I'm going to also, again, show some compassion to parents. I feel it's a bit unfair to people who have to pay premium to put their children in schools that offer or that promise to offer certain standards of upbringing, and then they are let down. Whilst it is the primary responsibility of parents to raise their children, but there is a duty of care. And the reason that has the word duty is that it's not volitional. It's not a matter of if you can or if you want to. It is a duty. People have paid money to employ your services. The reality of modern life does not allow that people can be there 24/7, even with the best of intentions to raise their children. So you have a duty of care to give them the best. I feel that if we hold boarding schools to the highest standard, it's not my preference, given that you can't control what happens, but it will be bad to also, again, I'll use the word demonize completely the system, because some of us went through it and there's some benefits. We turned out not so bad, and there's some benefits as far as a sense of independence, ability to be able to engage and interact with other people across different segments of the country is concerned. So I feel that we should just hold proprietors, teachers to higher standards and to the duty of care than we've currently done, and it should be.
All right, thank you very much. Any other stab at the issue of boarding school? I do agree with you, Tosin, that you cannot demonize an entire institution. Possibly we need to raise the standard. The problem is not the occurrence itself, it's not the existence of boarding schools, it's how it's practiced. And it has taken a societal issue. And if we correct that issue, then the expression of it within the boarding school expression definitely will change. Thank you very much.
Yes,
we do have.
I'd like to add something.
Okay, yes.
I'd like to add something to that. So he's mentioned the duty of care. Obviously, there's a legal obligation actually on everybody who has custody of a child to ensure that child. And that is what happens in the boarding house when the children are relinquished to the authority of the school. So the school should be held to higher standards and all of that, but by who? And this again, it falls back to the state, because the state has the supervisory role over all of these schools. So the real demand is that the state needs to wake up to its responsibilities. And it's not as if these agencies and bodies who should carry out this role are not there. They are there, but are they compromised? Are they independent? I interacted with a friend of mine who works with the Ministry of Education, full of complaints and cries about how they just can't do their work because of fear. There's a big corruption element in all of this. The agencies, the monitoring and supervising authorities are not independent. A lot of times, they are not able to effectively and dispassionately carry out their role. So that is where the real problem is, because the supervising authority is just not doing their work. A lot of times, a lot of all of these things are buried. Even when there are reports, nothing comes out of it. People are fatigued. And then they tell you that there are a lot of big masquerades behind some of these schools. In fact, she was telling me about an instance where a particular school, some incidents that happened with a particular school where the proprietor is an ex-legislator, a former member of the Senate. So you see that all of these political influences still come to play. And then the corruption also carries on there. Even when they go to the schools, they typically sometimes, she even told me sometimes they don't go around to carry out their inspection exercise. They go to the principal's office, they are taken care of, some envelope is handed off to you, and then you go. Standard. There's a standard to be set by the state, which all of the schools are required to meet, to comply with. So it means that someone along that chain is not doing their job. So when we are requiring of the schools to meet this standard, we must also insist that the state actors must do everything to ensure that the standard is met. So I just thought I should make that point of the role that the state has to play, the role of corruption, political influence, and all of these things. Thank you.
Okay, Chief, thank you. I think parents also need to be added to that list Because if my child is in your care and I'm not seeing what
Absolutely.
you're doing, I should be able to come forward and speak up. So it's about the school, the regulatory authorities, the parents themselves. We need to add them to that list.
Absolutely.
And when you were talking about somebody in the ministry saying this, I was laughing because I've had to face them. And frankly, I don't see why they can't do their jobs. They say they give them envelope. Okay, Chi, I want to shock you. I'm a school person. It is demanded, directly or indirectly, it's demanded. And if you don't do, it depends on how much you put in the envelope for them. I will decide to walk around your school and see. I will see mistake and overlook. Let's not go there when we're talking about corruption. That's not why we're here.
Apparently, what I'm seeing now is that the children are just collateral damage of a much bigger problem. A society that has no respect for law, has no respect for order, has no respect for due process. And unfortunately, it is an expression that children now begin to be the ones that suffer. Does anyone agree?
Sadly so.
Absolutely. So a lot has been said about physical violence, but I also need to point out that there are other forms of violence, you know, psychological, emotional, and all of these ones manifest in exploitation of children. So for instance, all of this domestic help that you have, no child has any business, it's against the law to be a domestic aid, even though the law makes a little bit of an exception in family situations where the child is a domestic help to a relative, a family member. But I think that even that exception shouldn't have been made at all. So cases like you see children begging on the streets, being guides for the blind and begging, hawking, and all of that. These are all acts prohibited by the law and actually criminalized. But what do you see? You would probably see a child walking on a major road, and then there's a police officer there who does not even realize or acknowledge that the child should not be doing that, because the law actually empowers such an officer to take hold of that child and find out the circumstances of the child and then activate the law to protect this child. But a lot of times they don't do this because social amenities, the security, will I call it, the security facilities that should be there are not there for these children. So instances like that, the state is supposed to have facilities, homes, where children in troubled situations, in exploitative situations, can be rescued from and kept under the care of either the state, or guardianship of the child can be awarded to any other family member who is in a position to care for that child. But all of these things are not, we have all of them in the law, but no teeth, because even the facilities to enable this law work are not in place. So it's really a very terrible situation. There's a long way to go. There's so much to be done to actually help children in this country.
I like the last point you just made, Ogechi, about the fact that the facilities and institutions to give the legislation any relevance don't exist. We don't have social workers. We have a dearth of orphanages. I don't know of any state-run orphanages. Counselors, psychiatrists and psychologists.
We have here and there a handful, but nothing. It's just a scratch of the surface. Yeah. Nothing to meet the real problem of the society. One or two here, just to tick the box.
Welfare, and the Ministry of Welfare, and where they have the VRS, if you look, they have social workers.
Yes, they do.
They do have social workers, but what do they do?
Nothing.
I came in contact with them incidentally through this same Darwin College when a child was abused at home. and the school reported and got them in. And that was my first contact with them. And in the course of work, I've had to go to them. Now, my issue is they can't just wake up and go into a school and say, want to see. Like I said, schools keep records. There's a record for all this kind of thing. They should go regularly and look at those records. If the schools will be truthful in recording all incidents that happen, they can pick up and work with the school to regulate what is going on. Now, schools will report what is going on at home, but who's reporting what's going on at school? Because all the cases have been to them for have things to do with what parents have done with their children at home. So I think they should find a way, maybe create a body that will monitor this. I don't know, it's just a suggestion. There should be a special monitoring unit that goes around to check on all this, because what I know is once they deal with one person, others will sit up. As long as nobody is responsible, nobody is being dealt with, people will do things the way they want it. But once they know that, yes, we'll penalize you for this, we will all sit up. So the same goes for the government. If you say this, tomorrow you'll see all the schools towing all the lines.
Sorry, Ofi, may I please?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, there's an aspect to this conversation based on what our two eminent ladies have put forward in the last how many minutes, and something you had alluded to repeatedly that I want to highlight more specifically, more directly, a bit more holistically. I was saying that there are a number of things that you both, the two ladies have referenced, and which I think is very important, which Ofi also did highlight, and I thought we should address it more directly, more pointedly, and more holistically. And that's the fact of the personal value, social currents. I'm going to put a very direct question, for example, to Ofi. You imagine you're a former vice president or a senator, because this is the best way to have this conversation. And God forbid, you see, because no matter how we have this conversation, we have to realize there will still be parents and children who will go off the mark, who would be cases on the spectrum of the negative, which we have to address. You cannot have a society where there won't be situations, even with the best of efforts. So since that's the reality that belies us, it's important to address those scenarios possibly. If you were a senator or former vice president, former president, and your child is the bully, wouldn't you push the buttons you can push to protect your child? And let's have an honest conversation here. Wouldn't you do that? And then I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Because the reality is, anybody who has means and power would want to do what they have to do when push comes to shove to protect their child. So I think the conversation must also go to that, which is parents have to hold themselves to such high standards, morally, socially, whatever you want to call it, that should, God forbid, we hope for the best, we do everything we can, but should it happen that my child is involved in something they should not be involved in, I will volunteer that child for necessary discipline. I will volunteer the child. I will not use my privilege and position to cloud things, because guess what? That's not love for that child. We don't teach tough love also as love. I cannot say that I love my son or my daughter. I have a son, I have a daughter, and I cannot say that I love them and they're involved in something that will affect other children. And the thing to do is to ship them abroad, or to pay that, the outcome of an investigation should go in their favor. Or I'm not saying any such thing has been done. I'm just saying that is a culture we have here, because I need to save face, my name, honor, and celebration must go to parents who are willing to submit both themselves and their parents and their children, rather their wards, to whatever process is necessary for redemption and change. And we should not castigate such parents. We should actually, we should celebrate parents. Yeah, unfortunately, my child was the bully. Unfortunately, my child was the one who did the wrong thing to the other child. what do we need to do for this not to reoccur? We should make that a milestone for parents to attain, and not make it look like by all means parents have to do everything they have to do not to be on that side. Because what will happen is, when that then happens, parents will use their means to cover up their track.
Thank you very much, Tosin. You know, if you ask me that question more pointedly, I could tell you that I would do the right thing, because that's the way I was raised. In fact, I was in a couple of situations as a child where my father, a university professor, quote unquote, threw me under the bus. I remember two cases in particular where he sided with truth instead of me, his first child, his first son. And that just goes to show you, I mean, just to buttress the point that you are making, that what we are seeing is an erosion of values as a society. And because children are the most vulnerable, they are the ones who are propping all of this up. When elephants fight, the grass that suffers. When society goes to the dogs, it's children that suffer. So that would be the core thing that I would say about. Sorry, we do have a question here. Good afternoon, distinguished panelists and participants. My question is, how do we mandate the citizens to ensure that policies are appreciated and carried out? This issue is not just a government issue of lack of implementation, but a societal issue. So to the point that Ogechi was making, that we need to hold government accountable, how would be, what would be a proper way to galvanize society to hold government accountable?
I was just reading the question.
Seems like a very uphill task, but
yes, very interesting. So
yes, what are in a society that wants to hold people accountable?
I think,
how do we get?
I think the first place to start would be obviously awareness first, because a lot of times people don't even know about these rights, about the laws and the remedies available to them. So I think that that's the key thing, number one, to create that awareness. They know. The next thing would be to expose, to encourage people to expose these things as they happen. For instance, all of the cases that went viral, you see how people were very upset about these issues, and then it creates that awareness, and then it creates that need to resist it and confront it everywhere you find it. So I think that by the time people know about these things, they expose it, they call on government, they demand accountability, and that's the kind of societal action, I think, that will put pressure on the state, on the school proprietors, on the parents, and everybody to do the needful when it comes to this. Because a lot of times, these people don't even like the exposure they get. They don't like the bad press. The schools, the parents in state, everybody, nobody really likes some of the negative impacts and implications that come with the exposure and the pressure. So I think that if commit to doing that, you know, from time to time, it's the same thing that happened with even the issue of violence against women, discrimination against women, everything.
Most certainly agree with both of you. And even as we dovetail to the end of this conversation, I think just like Ogechi had pointed out, there was a lot of anger, a lot of emotion as these stories, the headline. However, I have long said and stated that anger is not a strategy. Emotion is not a strategy. It can galvanize strategy. It is needed to be the impetus behind strategy. And so once we feel the anger, we have that emotion, the sadness, the shock, the pain as a collective. At some point, and this is now to buttress what Emily is saying, that there needs to be concerted effort with civil society, the legal community, and with the media. And so this is something I've been thinking, and a couple of you have pointed out. So let's say I have my child in XYZ Academy that is owned by Senator Lagbaja. And Senator Lagbaja is trying to cover up a case because it hurts his pockets. If more people know about a case of bullying, rape, or abuse, or murder in his school, it's bad for business. Now, if we as a collective can make Senator Lagbaja know that if you address the issue, if you sanction whoever is responsible, who is guilty, after due process and due investigation, if you are able to provide succor and reprieve for whoever was hurt, it actually puts you in a better light. Because that gives parents confidence that if something was ever to happen to my child in XYZ Academy, it would be addressed. And so we need to be able to let practitioners and proprietors know in the education sphere that, look, if you do what is right and just, it's actually better for you. To cover things up is worse for you. We need to let people in government know, if you do not, as a permanent secretary, as a director, as a social worker, you very likely will be out of a job. If you're a politician, we are not going to vote for you if you do not take child's rights and protection as an integral aspect of your policy. And I think these are the things that we need to galvanize together so that there's not just pain and emotion, but there's actually change.
That's exactly what I was speaking to when I said we need to adjust the milestones. What you call an admirable standard needs to be changed. Those who return to say this should not have happened and we're doing something about it should be celebrated as much as those who did everything to prevent it from happening. If all we do is hail prevention and ignore those who do something to cure, then what you're telling those who have a disease is to hide it. They will hide it. But when we start to encourage schools, parents, that should something happen by your word or within your school, and you address it, you will actually get the encouragement, support of the society. Then people will volunteer the truth. But people feel a need to hide things because they believe if I don't hide it, there will be dire consequences for my business and for my child. That's what I was talking about. So we need to readjust the milestones and make up our minds what the standards are. Abroad, for example, somebody is being alleged to be involved in a corruption. Even before it is fully investigated and found to be the case, he already recuses himself. She recuses herself from that position. In this part of the world, we believe that should you even be accused, there's mob justice, there are all kinds of things. So you almost can't blame people when they need to protect themselves from a society that is that judgmental.
You even win an election, even with a murder charge on your neck. You win an election in this country.
Exactly. So we need to adjust the milestones and make sure that honest, honorable people who are willing to submit and subject themselves to the scrutiny of everybody, and when they're found to be wanting, they admit and do the honorable, should be commended and made the standard. That's the way we will deal with these things, lurking within our crevices. Otherwise, everybody will use their means to hide it.
At this point, I do not see that we have any other questions. And so I would like to get concluding thoughts from any of the panelists, or all the panelists, as it were. Your concluding thoughts before we summarize and take any other business. I'll start with our keynote speaker, Ajisebutu.
At this point, I would like to just tell everybody that it's important that we all get into this fight. We all have a role to play. We all have a duty to perform by informing those around us and campaigning for this move so that everybody, one way or the other, would be on the bandwagon fighting the issue of violence against children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tosin?
I'll conclude by saying that we must put money in its proper place. What you can buy for children and afford for children does not compare to what you can put in children. And if what we are putting in the children is short compared to what we're doing for the children, then the future is not secure. So my encouragement is that we restore the importance of what we put into children at the fore, and allow that becomes the standard, so that we're willing to make whatever sacrifices is necessary. There's too much of giving children the best financially rather than making children the best they can be. And that investment in their person must tower above the investment for them. We do too much for them than we do.
Gary, if you walk out that door, don't you come back.
That's my encouragement. Hello. Okay. So if we're able to prioritize and put the cart where it should be and the horse where it should be, I think that we can get a bit more universal national standard. Basically, let's just restore the village. It used to be that a village raised a child, but nowadays there are social contradictions. What you do within your home is still endangered by what other people do outside their homes. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Tosin. Ogechi, your concluding thoughts, please.
Thank you. Well, while it's been identified that we all have a role to play, particularly as parents, to pay attention to our children, but unfortunately, there are a number of children out there who just don't have that parental love for circumstances beyond their control. So ultimately, the state, the government, has the obligation and duty to protect these children, all the children in this country. The government has an international, regional, and now national obligation to provide for the welfare and safety of children. So I would really want the government to give life to the Child Rights Act and the laws in the relevant states by budgeting. In the budget, the government needs to commit, make children a priority by even budgeting in the budget, making the allocation that is required to care for children, providing the safety, the social amenities necessary to protect children, activating the implementation committee, setting it up. This is a body that the government should set up to monitor how children are faring in this country. So I think that while we all do our bit, and then the government does all of this, the fortune will be better for our children. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ogechi. And finally, we go to Sam Obafemi. Your concluding submissions.
Thank you so much to everyone. And I want to say everyone has spoken very well. My take is that in every nation, the political machinery is very key and critical to a lot of things. No matter how much we say and debate, if we're not part of the political machinery, I think that it may not amount to much. If you see the NSAS incidents and the way things played out, with the response of the government, and even how we have noticed the 2023 preparations, you can just tell that there's something is fundamentally skewed. So my take is that we who are more interested in private practice and private work should encourage more of our people to belong to political engagements and political machineries and join the political process, run for elective office, so that if over time, in quote, we who think we have what to offer become part of the political system, then we are in a better position to influence what we are advocating for on the bystand. So that's my take. I want to encourage every one of us to contribute to the political conversations. I recall that sometimes when I try to write my feedback or response to some decisions about government, some mentors will come and say, no, pull it down. You don't trust this government. Anything can happen to you. I think we should not be afraid of contributing to political debates and conversations, because ultimately, when we keep quiet, like that popular saying, I can't remember who said it, says that people are not governed by bad people. It's when good people refuse to say something that the society becomes very bad. So I'm riding on Pastor Tosin's comment to say, as much as we're instilling and investing in the child, we must also begin to invest in the political machinery so that somehow over time, these tides would change. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you very much, Emily, Ajisebutu, Ogechi Abu, Toasty Martins, and Funmi Ogbue, who unfortunately had to leave a little early for another engagement. Well, thank you so much for attending the Fundacion Exito, the Architect Invest Education webinar series. We have taken a look at the spate of violence, bullying, and rape against children in the Nigerian space. And we've looked at the legal, the institutional, the societal, and cultural issues that have exacerbated this pandemic. We've also tried to prefer solutions, and hopefully all that we've discussed will be used to funnel into policy formulation. And hopefully we have done enough to move this conversation and these milestones an inch further to the finish line. My name is Ofi HMB. It's been my pleasure to be moderator of this wonderful series. And I'll see you next time when you make me the moderator for your next event. Mani for the vote. Thanks and concluding thoughts. I'm Ofi HMB. Goodbye. Godspeed.
Thank you so much, Ovi. So as necessary and important as this conversation is, I must say that it is indeed very, very heartbreaking. Just to hear how badly this epidemic affects our children and their growth and development is just saddening, but it's something that must be said, something that we must hear and do. So this is a matter that requires urgent attention and must be addressed critically. If indeed the statistics are showing that about 40% of criminals experience some form of childhood trauma, then it is high time we sit up and begin our fight for tomorrow's leaders. And when I say we all, I mean parents, schools, the church, our community, and then the government. If we, as the people, are interested in the long-term peace of society, then we must invest heavily in the protection of minors and children in general. So I, on behalf of Fundacion Exito, a non-governmental social enterprise, and the entire panelists, the crew, the team, and special guests here, I thank all our attendees. So I also extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the moderator and all the speakers for educating us and empowering us with the necessary laws to use as tools in the fight for justice and the fight for the welfare of our children. So, and lastly, for you all that joined early and had to wait for the webinar to start, please accept our deep sense of appreciation. I thank you all again for being with us. It has remained a pronounced pleasure. Have a great day.